And welcome to the Missions Podcast, coming to you from the For the Church Conference in Kansas City at Midwest Baptist Theological Seminary. I'm Alex Cookman, Director of Communications and Media for ABWE, joined by a fellow ABWE worker, missionary Steven Wendel from the Czech Republic, is where you and your wife have served for how long?
For just short of 14 years.
14 years.
Yeah. So we're glad to be here. We're actually in the middle of a transition back from the Czech Republic.
That is public knowledge now. You can say that? Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
Absolutely. So we're transitioning back to take on some different roles. And so we're excited about that. But yeah, here at the For the Church Conference.
Very good.
With ABWE.
We're glad to be here because the theme of the conference this year is for not only the church, but for the nations.
Absolutely.
And so it's great to have you here, and you're not too far. Since you've relocated to the U.S., you're only about 30 minutes out, so this worked out really well.
Yeah, it's great.
We're excited to introduce you to our ABWE listening audience as well. But let me throw something at you, and you can react to it. So Don't take any offense.
All right.
But I mean this as a compliment. The thing that I've found the more that I interact with missionaries from a variety of agencies, including ABWE, is, and this has been my experience for the 6 years I've been with ABWE, that missionaries are some of the most gloriously normal people.
Absolutely.
So you're gloriously normal. It's my impression of you, right?
Yeah.
You don't levitate. At least I haven't seen you do that yet.
No, not at all. And that's really on my heart, has been to kind of take down some of those barriers or some of those misconceptions about missions and missionaries that gives people pause, that makes people hesitate to really respond to Jesus' call to go.
Yeah.
I think that being a missionary is easier than you might think.
That's controversial on this podcast. We want to raise the bar. You're not helping us raise the bar. You're lowering the bar. Explain. Defend yourself.
There's 1,000 caveats that might go along with that, but maybe just.
And we won't make any of them.
Okay,
we'll just assume them. Fill them out in your head. Yeah. Make a few caveats.
Let me just tell you my story a little bit.
Yes.
And that is that, my wife and I, we felt called to missionary service in college, got married, started our family, and we were kind of at the point where we figured it's time to actually go now. And I had been serving as a part-time associate pastor in a local rural church, and now it's time to go and be church planting missionaries cross-culturally. And there's a big voice in the back of my head just saying, "Who are you kidding?"
You were a part-time associate pastor.
Right,
I mean, you were overqualified.
I haven't planted a church in North America. How am I going to plant a church cross-culturally?
Yeah.
And that's kind of a big, daunting. How can I possibly do all of this? I'm incompetent or not skilled in so many areas.
And you're not redefining a church plant as three people sitting under a tree with a Bible either. You're thinking
I'm just imagining having to wear every single hat and do everything. And so I think it's helpful to kind of dispel that myth of what church planting actually looks like for a missionary. And so if you would have asked me as a young man, well, Steve, what are your skills and gifts? Why do you think you can be a church planter? I'd probably stare at you like a cow looking at a new gate. And I might still do that if you ask me that now, but I've been surprised. And that's to say that if you have been an active member in a local church, you are probably far more competent and skilled than you even realize.
Especially a local church here in North America. Where we have so much knowledge, so many programs and resources that we take for granted.
Absolutely. There's all kinds of things that we like to critique about church, and particularly the North American church. But the reality is that the normal North American church is actually a pretty well-oiled machine.
Yeah.
Have you taught Sunday school? Have you helped organize or facilitate a VBS? Have you been part of a small group, done a men's or women's Bible study? Have you done camps? Have you participated in the worship team? Have you helped with tech in your church? Have you done retreats or conferences, or have you seen these things done? All of these things are actually competencies. And maybe you haven't even done all these things, but you've seen them. You've seen models of how they work. And in the vast majority of cross-cultural contexts, or at least in many of them, that's not true for the average church member. It's not even true for the average pastor leading a church or a church plant in a lot of contexts. And so just what you bring to the table, having been an active church member, is vital and valuable in a local church.
I think that's super helpful, because we were talking about this a little bit yesterday, and we're surrounded by pastors here For the Church, but the people listening are pastors or missionaries, are seminary students or lay people, a variety of stripes. And there's sort of ditches on both sides of the mobilization conversation, right? There's the one ditch of missions is so easy, anyone could do it without any qualifications, and we set the bar too low. The other ditch on the other side, though, we've got to kind of call our side out a little bit as well, is to speak about missions in such a way where the bar is so high that the only people who can ever do anything meaningful in a cross-cultural context are those who are male, elder qualified, pioneering, lead church plant type executive pastoral material, which isn't always the case. And the way that I would articulate this, and I'd love to hear from your experience in the Czech Republic, how this happened in the life of your local church, but the way that I would articulate it would be, well, if the goal is to plant a church, Paul always worked in teams, and the body of Christ involves multiple members, multiple parts, hands, feet, eyes, ears, and likewise, the effort to plant a church in a new context is going to involve not just the feet that go, but also the hands and the kneecaps and the earlobes and every part of the body that's a little bit less noticeable. Read some of Paul's letters. The number of people that he greets at the end are people that were probably serving a little bit more behind the scenes. Maybe didn't have the same apostolic sort of gift set that Paul had, and yet they were vital to the formation of new congregations, and that's the goal, and that's been your experience, I understand, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's kind of this pitfall as North American missionary. There's kind of this reality of, we function on support, on partnership with local churches, and when a church puts you up on a pedestal as a missionary, it's a temptation to allow that to happen, right? By your own press. And the reality is that being a missionary is far more pedestrian than being on a pedestal. And when we go, in the majority of contexts that we go as missionaries, there's already a local church desiring to work with a missionary. There's a national pastor that's trained on some level, likely needing more training, but there are co-laborers already, and besides that, a team of missionaries that you're likely serving with. And so this idea that I have to be able to do it all and be skilled and competent in every single area is largely inaccurate. And there's already work going on. And really, that's what's exciting about being a missionary, is that there's so much work to do, so much ministry that needs to be done. When you come into a local church or a church planting situation cross-culturally, you can see what needs to be done and then come alongside and enhance the ministry of a national partner. So a few years ago in our ministry, we were looking at relocating cities, and this city, I knew of a national pastor that was working on a church plant, and we went out to coffee, and I explained to him, we're looking at relocating to the city. We've met before, we've talked, I'd really like to come alongside you and help you in the ministry that you're doing. And he literally started weeping. And he said, this is an answer to prayer. I need so much help. And that is the reality, is that we're coming alongside people and helping shoulder the load. It's not all about me and what I can do. It's about how I can help. And I think that's a better way to think about much of what we do in missions. It's coming alongside a local church and local partners and helping shoulder the load.
Posture of a learner, posture of a servant.
Absolutely. It's serving. So if you have a heart to serve, if you have a heart to help carry the load of a pastor, you're very useful. You're very useful as a missionary.
Because not all those churches are quite as well-oiled machines as some of our larger, more established churches here at home.
Exactly. I mean, the first church plant we were working in overseas, there were more children in the service than adults, and they had no idea what to do with all these kids. I was like,
keep them in the service.
yeah.
Catechize them.
But it was quite distracting. And
Yeah,
loud.
it can be. Yes,
Lots of families with young children, and we were like, well, have you ever done like a Sunday school? Had something.
What now?
And it was like, well, yeah, we've heard of that, and so even those kinds of things. I mean, you'd be surprised at just the normal ministries that we do in North America. And I'm not talking about doing it in a very paternalistic way. Of course, things need to adjust and be fine-tuned to be relevant and helpful in the context in which we apply them.
Just seeing a
Bible
need
studies,
and filling it.
worship through singing, small groups. All these things are pretty much across the board what we do as a church across the world. And so again, let me just encourage people, if they're thinking about missionary service and feeling a little bit overwhelmed by it, I guarantee you, if you have been an active part of a local church here, you are useful there, wherever there might be.
Yeah. Don't use that as an excuse to not do something. Well, I'm not the Apostle Paul. I'm not Steve Wendel. I couldn't possibly, and you would say there's other ways to serve. But let me ask you something sort of as a devil's advocate.
Okay.
Scott Dunford's not here. I'm going to be the devil's advocate this time.
Okay.
I'm going to say, well, I'm curious, and then we're going to go from there.
We'll see.
That's his trademark. Anyways, what if somebody were to say, yeah, but Steve, that's only true in the Czech Republic because the Czech Republic is reached, because there's some churches there already. There's already a Christian witness there. Real missions is out where there are unreached language groups, unreached people groups, where there aren't churches established already. That's where the tip of the spear, that's where we need the most new laborers, the most new workers.
Sure.
And what would you say to someone that would challenge your definition of missions a little bit as being maybe a little bit too normal, too pedestrian?
Okay. To that, I would say I would not recommend that anybody go be the tip of the spear alone. And I think we're seeing the wisdom now. I think there are very few churches or mission agencies, hopefully, that would send you to be the tip of the spear alone. Just you, Alex, go do this thing. We know the wisdom of working in teams, because the truth is, me or you, we can't possibly have all of the tools in our pocket that we need to plant that church by ourselves.
Right.
And so when in that exceptional, very unreached context where there is no church witness, where there are no trained leaders, we're sending teams, and so you're going to be serving as part of a team, and you're going to be working hard and doing a lot and serving a lot, but you'll be doing it shoulder to shoulder with other people and still functioning as a body.
So if you have gifts of service, helping, supporting, you can either be using that in an active, already existing church, or in the context of a missionary team, where again, you might have people that are more of a Paul, other people that are a little bit more of a Timothy or a Titus, and that's okay. Again, you need every type of personality, wiring, gifting.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly correct. And so in that way, I'd say being a missionary might be a lot easier than you might think.
In a certain sense.
In a certain sense. In another sense, it's harder than you can possibly imagine. Right? It is, I don't want to say it's a high calling, but it is a specific kind of a calling.
It's a high calling.
So it's harder. I was a missions major in college, and I learned all this stuff, cultural anthropology, cross-cultural communication, all of these things, and it's up here, right? But to go and experience it is something altogether different. Like so much of life, we learn things, but then we see them play out in real life, and nothing could have really prepared you for that.
Right.
I remember, maybe a good analogy was, I remember a couple weeks ago you had Glenn Scrivener on, and he's this kind of analogy of the air that we breathe. Yeah. And the truth is, there's no way to prepare you for breathing another air. Yeah. Not entirely. I mean, when you're transferred into another atmosphere, you gag and you choke, and that's part of the experience. Specifically for us in Czech Republic, it's kind of it took us a while, just because, I can walk down the street in Prague and pretty much fit in like everyone else. Like, nobody looks at me and says, oh yeah, that's an American.
Right.
And so you almost take for granted, because you might look like everyone else or something that you think the same, but the way that we think is so different. And
interesting.
it's so difficult to wrap your mind around how another culture and people in another atmosphere interpret reality.
What's an example of that? Because Czech Republic, pretty modern European country.
Yeah, so this is some surprising things. I mean, for example, in language study early on, we were trying to learn some words. I was trying to learn the word for generous, and so and I was trying to describe the teacher didn't know the word, and I'm trying to explain to her, somebody that maybe helps other people with their money. She says, a fool?
There's a sermon illustration in there somewhere.
Yeah, and so, but just realizing, the way that other people think is very different, and even within the church. So another just brief example, our church we wanted to do some outreach. And specifically, we had a church with some young families and a lot of kids, and we're like, well, how can we attract other young families? This seems to be who we'd have a good chance of attracting, how can we reach out as a church and do something? And I was kind of like, well, we could do, it was fall, and I was kind of like, harvest carnival, kind of thing. Could we do something like this, And they're like, well, what's that? And I was like, well, we have some games, some contests, maybe some face painting. Maybe we could have a booth where we share the gospel with people or about our church or something like that. And people start murmuring and they're talking about it with each other, and they get very serious. They're like, I don't know that the Lord is okay with us having fun at church. And I thought, and it shouldn't have, but it really I didn't know that was going to be I anticipated maybe the finances or the logistics of hosting this thing.
Right.
But their issue was they weren't sure if it was okay to just have fun at church. So all these kinds of things you learn. And
then they tasted one pumpkin spice latte, and you had won them over.
And to this day, now this church, we're not there, and they, kicked and screamed putting on this carnival, and they didn't like it. But years later, now they're repeating it and doing it over and over again. So I don't know, but those are just some examples. But so that gets from, there's a lot of things, and there's a million things that are really hard. Just the daily stress of living in another atmosphere, as it were. It is tiring in a lot of ways that you don't expect until you come back to your home atmosphere and realize, oh wow, how easy it is to breathe here. But I would say it's easier, it's harder, but in all of it, it's better than you might expect. One of the glorious things about being a missionary, I think, is being free to fail. And you experience a lot of failure as a missionary. In language, as your first taste of just constant incompetence daily, learning how to function, and no matter how much you practice for it and how much you expect it, it's still shocking and it still hurts. This is a funny example. With learning Czech language, there's a certain reflexive verb that you need to use when you say that you like somebody. And so I thought I was being really friendly and positive by telling people, oh, Carl, I really like Carl. He's such a guy or whatever. And I was using this, telling everybody how much I like people or whatever. And I didn't find out until sometime later I was not using the reflexive verb properly, and I was actually telling people how much other people liked me. And I was saying, Carl, he really likes me. He's a really great guy. And so everybody thought Steve was like this arrogant egomaniac, that I was going around.
You clearly give off that vibe, too.
And so, right, which is why it's so mortifying to me, right? Because I'm trying to be encouraging and tell everybody how much, I just love that guy. He's such a great guy, And really, I'm telling everybody how much everybody loves me, and what a mortifying and embarrassing mistake that is. And you just fail like that. You fall on your face all the time. But because of that, you learn a lot. And I'll just tell you this secret. When you fail as a minister in a North American church, it hurts. And people are there to point out your failure and critique.
Oftentimes.
And it can be harsh and it can be hurtful. And yet for some reason, everybody expects missionaries to fail. And so if I report my failures on the mission field, everybody's like, oh, that's all right, you'll get it. And so there's actually a lot of grace for missionaries.
Yeah.
And so let me just encourage you with that. If you're a perfectionist and you're afraid of failure, there's a lot of grace for missionaries, and you're free to fail, which actually opens you up to a whole world of growth. And that's why I say it's better than you can ever imagine. Harder, but better, because you get this liberation to grow in different ways that you wouldn't have grown probably here. And so you grow in some strange ways and some unique ways, and you come back to North American culture and you're a strange-looking tree, maybe compared to everybody else.
Yeah.
But there's just a side to life and growth and your walk with the Lord that you experience in a whole new way.
Amen.
Serving on the mission field.
That's very cool. And to bring it back to that final exhortation, if you can be a faithful church member with what it means to be a church member, which is not just a passive participant, somebody that's serving, somebody that's initiating new ministries, that's paying attention to those that are being overlooked in the congregation, who's a help and not a hindrance to the pastors and the elders, those that are leading the church. If you can do that, you may have what it takes to be a faithful missionary member of a church elsewhere that's still forming and still being established.
Yeah.
And you're going through a transition. Briefly, how can people pray for you as you're transitioning back to the U.S. for now?
Yeah, I mean, just pray for, it's a hard, we were ready to give our full life's measure serving in the Czech Republic, and we thought we would. We thought we were going to live and die there, die on that hill, fighting to win the souls of the Czech nation. And
again,
but it's, the Lord very clearly redirected us. And, part of being a missionary is also learning to live with open hands. And that's exciting, but also it can be difficult and challenging. And so coming back to North America, we're passionate about reaching the nations, and yet we've been led back here. And so I wouldn't say we have an identity crisis, but there's a part of us that hurts, and so that's why my heart just burns to send more. Like you can do this. Go. We're coming back, but please go.
You can do it.
You have
by
what
God's
it takes.
grace.
I have confidence you have what it takes.
And if you're weak, then that's when Christ is going to display his power.
Absolutely.
When you're weak, when you're disqualified, when you're not this omnicompetent, levitating Pauline missionary.
Absolutely. And so for all the competencies that you do lack, I would just say that God's grace just abounds in ways that you would not expect.
Very cool.
So pray for us as we make the transition this way. We still want to be useful tools in God's hands, and our heart's desire is to see other people be useful tools cross-culturally.
Very good.
Those missionaries.
Very good. Well, we encourage you to be praying for the Wendel family. And we thank you for joining us for this episode of the Missions Podcast from For the Church in Kansas City, Missouri. To get more content, go to missionspodcast.com. The Missions Podcast is a ministry of ABWE. To learn more about ABWE, go to abwe.org. And while you're there, remember to share the show, subscribe, rate, review, do all those wonderful podcast things that help appease the algorithms and get this in front of other people that can be blessed by the content. Until our next episode from the For the Church Conference, thank you for watching and thank you for listening.